I myself still fly a Wasp motor, which has carried me over the North Atlantic, part of the Pacific, to and from Mexico City, and many times across this continent. Aviation, this young modern giant, exemplifies the possible relationship of women and the creations of science. Although women as yet have not taken full advantage of its use and benefits, air travel is as available to them as to men.
Since Amelia Earhart's last flight in 1937, public attention has focused on her aviation records, her career, and her mysterious disappearance, all of which have formed her extraordinary legacy. Despite her international acclaim, Earhart's more personal side has been more difficult to determine. Like many celebrities, Earhart guarded her private life intensely. In 2002, Purdue University received a donation of papers, including some of Earhart's poetry and letters. These items greatly enriched the Earhart collection that George Palmer Putnam, Earhart's publicist and husband, had previously donated, making Purdue the largest collection on Earhart worldwide. Archivist Sammy Morris cataloged the 2002 papers, giving us fresh insights into the Amelia Earhart behind the public persona.
There were some things from whenever Amelia wasn't famous yet. So whenever she was a teenager and in her early 20s, there wasn't anything in our previous collection about that time period. And so these materials allowed us to see her before she sort of became the famous person that she is known as today. And so you were able to see what it was like for a young woman to grow up in, a small town and move around a lot and writing poetry and being very interested in women's issues and things like that from an early age.
A second rich collection of Earhart's letters resides at the Schlesinger Library at the Radcliffe Institute. Together, these archival collections give voice to an Earhart the public has rarely seen, revealing a more human side to a figure often depicted as a two-dimensional hero. In 1928, images of Earhart formed the first impression of our new American hero when she became the first woman to cross the Atlantic as a passenger on the Friendship flight. More importantly, the newsreel helped catapult Earhart into international stardom. Earhart was a little-known pilot when she first met Putnam and his associates. They were seeking a photogenic aviatrix who was well-spoken and could write a book about the journey. Once Amelia was selected, Putnam, known as GP, became her publisher and publicist, coaching her on her public appearances. The world saw what GP allowed us to see, even if it meant staging retakes of record-setting events in order to create an exciting image.
There is the example whenever she was leaving for her last flight, and they were filming that, and there's a scene where he comes up to her and it looks like maybe they're going to embrace and then they don't, and she's kind of giggling and then they shake hands. And so I think it still gets back to that sense of her privacy. She was incredibly private, and even people who knew her very well have said, and it's later been quoted in books about her, that they just didn't feel like they knew the intimate side of her very well. And that's one reason I think working with her papers is so exciting, because you do get these personal notes that she was writing, and it's really the only insight you have into that personal piece of her. Even before they were married, he really thought of Amelia as a brand to be promoted. And he would say things to her like, "Don't wear hats. One of the most appealing things about you is your tousled hair. So, don't cover that up." And he wanted her to smile in a way that didn't show off her gap-toothed grin. And he really, I do think that he loved Amelia, but he also was thinking about her in a way, that you might market a product. And he was trying to make sure that she appealed to a wide mass of people. And so he did take kind of a micromanaging approach to her appearance in some ways.
Despite her willingness to appear on camera, Earhart's shyness is evident in her body language, eye contact, and voice. Yet fame came with the territory if she wanted to fund her future flights. female pilots were all the rage in the 1920s, combining the thrill and danger of emerging aviation technology with the daring freedom of the new liberated woman. As her publicist, Putnam controlled a certain mystique about Earhart's image, presenting both a statuesque celebrity and a tomboyish mechanic, complete with tousled hair. The press noticed a resemblance to aviator Charles Lindbergh and dubbed her Lady Lindy, a nickname which embarrassed Earhart, but added to her celebrity branding. Under contract with GP, Earhart published 2 books, and Putnam finished a 3rd book after her disappearance. Her first book, 20 Hours, 40 Minutes, gives the reader a bird's-eye view of what it's like to fly and chronicles her difficult trip across the Atlantic as a passenger in 1928. In her second book, Earhart had the opportunity to explore her life, her ideas, and her passions with readers. Now a celebrity, she answered the questions people so often asked. Why fly? Why risk your life? Her motivation is the title of her book, The Fun of It. Communications professor Robin Jensen and her graduate class studied Earhart's rhetoric in the book, focusing on Earhart's transcendent persona. Aaron Doss was one of the students who delved into the archives at Purdue to understand Earhart more completely.
So when we talk about the transcendent persona, we're talking about someone who has done something different, something incredible that other people either haven't done or can't do, and then that gives them kind of this transcendent place that they can make arguments from. So in Earhart's case, obviously it was this place of flying, and she could then argue that women, because she was a woman and she could fly, other women could fly and could do other things as well. And when she was making these arguments, she was balancing kind of this mysterious, transcendent place with kind of more practical, concrete things that people could identify with. So she would talk about flying through clouds that looked like mashed potatoes and looking down on fields that looked like patchwork quilts and things like that other people hadn't experienced and probably would never really experience. But at the same time, she would talk about things that people could relate to. So she would talk about how flying was like, taking off when you're flying was like going up an elevator, or how driving a car is like flying an airplane. And she had this vision that everyone in the future would have an airplane parked in their driveway, the way people have cars now. So she very much wanted people to be able to relate and to believe that even though she had had this transcendent experience, they could identify with her and they also could have similar kinds of experiences.
In The Fun of It, Earhart reflects on her Midwestern upbringing and her daring behavior from a young age.
Tradition hampers just as much as clothing. From the period when girls were not supposed to be able to do anything comes a natural doubt whenever they attempt new or different activities. My sister and I had the first gymnasium suits in town. We wore them Saturdays to play in, and though we felt terribly free and athletic, we also felt somewhat as outcasts among the little girls who fluttered about us in their skirts.
In addition to presenting herself as a free-minded young woman, Earhart helps the public see the world of flight from the cockpit, an omnipotent position. She wrote in a vivid style, painting a landscape of wondrous nature.
Perhaps the greatest joy of flying is the magnificence of the view. If visibility is good, the passenger seems to see the whole world. Colors stand out and shades of the earth, unseen from below, form an endless magic carpet. If anyone really wishes to see the season's changes, he should fly. Autumn turns its most flaming leaves upward, and spring hints its coming first for birds and aviators.
In addition to her books, Earhart also served as a guest columnist for newspapers and magazines, writing about the future of aviation and women's equality. Her business-like rhetoric is sometimes punctuated with her wry sense of humor as she muses on these topics and society's inability to see past traditional roles for women. As an international celebrity, Earhart also made extensive speaking tours, often flying or driving herself from one location to the next on a grueling schedule. One of her speeches impressed Purdue President Edward C. Elliott, who offered her a position as a career counselor for women. While working in residence at Purdue in the mid-1930s, students got a glimpse of Earhart's more personal side. She accepted an invitation to stay in Windsor Halls, a woman's dormitory. Earhart enjoyed her time with students and the opportunity to relax from her more formal appearances. Dorothy Stratton, Dean of Women at the time, recalls the tremendous impact her presence had on campus.
After Amelia finished her lunch, she liked to sit with her elbows on the table and talk. And Helen had been trying to get the women students to keep their elbows off the table. So the students went to Helen and said, well, Amelia puts her elbows on the table, why can't we? And Helen said, after you have flown the Atlantic alone, you too may put your elbows on the table.
Earhart helped create a survey of Purdue's female students and gave a speech explaining the results at the first annual career conference on campus in 1935. Surprisingly, she found that 92% of the women planned to work after leaving college, with only 7% undecided.
The reasons for seeking employment were first, not economic necessity, as you might suppose, but to achieve professional success, to have the mental stimulus of accomplishing something. Second, to attain personal independence. And third, because of economic necessity. These results are very interesting, as women as a whole have not had enough experience to know the joy of independent work as men know it. All too often, women have had to bury what they had of the creative in routine tasks, which have not brought them even the reward of a little spending money of their own.
Given the vivid imagery in her books and speeches, it's not surprising that Earhart loved poetry and literature from a young age. Even as a budding poet, she showed her willingness to believe in herself and pursue her dreams, attempting to get her work published.
When Amelia was in her early 20s, she sent off some poems under a pseudonym to Poetry Magazine, and she used the name Earhart, and it was a masculine name, but also obviously a play on her name, and it was spelled a little bit differently. But I think the reason that she did this was she'd always loved poetry, she'd always dreamed of being a writer, but there was a private side of her that maybe was afraid of rejection. And I think she also was very aware of the scarcity of women poets at the time, because she was really following Poetry Magazine from an early age. She and her sister Muriel were taught by a governess who really pushed poetry as one of the things they learned about from an early age. And I think she started collecting these little clippings of women poets because it was an unusual thing, and she thought it was really interesting that a woman could do that. And I think that maybe there was a little bit of fear that if she submitted something as a woman, it might be more likely to be rejected. But what was interesting was that the editor of the Poetry Magazine gave her good feedback. Even though they were rejected, she really encouraged her to submit more, which I think says a lot, since she was just a totally unknown name at that time.
Palm tree. Like crackling icicles, your brittle sword branches rattle in the small breezes of thick, warm nights. Knowing nothing of cold, is it with malice of ignorance that you chill the thick, warm dreams of souls, uneasy at discomfort?
I like the way she uses sound in that poem. It's a very short poem, and it's free verse, just like all of the poems of hers that I've seen. But the sound she uses in the words that she chooses, especially in the first stanza, really emulate the sounds of what she's talking about, which is, ice and tree branches and cracking and snow. And so she uses all of these hard consonants that kind of evoke a snapping or crackling sound as you're reading it. And I think that was definitely intentional.
Earhart's best-known poem, Courage, is usually assumed to address her courage as a pilot, but her sister, Muriel, states that Amelia wrote it in her early 20s after breaking up with her fiancé. At once intensely personal and universal, Courage gives us a rare view of Earhart's vulnerability as she considers the courage to make difficult decisions.
Courage is the price which life exacts for granting peace. The soul that knows it not knows no release from little things. knows not the livid loneliness of fear, nor mountain heights, where bitter joy can hear the sound of wings. How can life grant us boon of living, compensate for dull, gray ugliness and pregnant hate, unless we dare the soul's dominion? Each time we make a choice, we pay with courage to behold resistless day and count it fair.
Perhaps the most courageous decision Earhart made was not to fly, but to marry. As a child of divorce herself, she spoke candidly about marriage being an end to a woman's freedom. Putnam himself divorced his wife to marry Earhart, and she repeatedly refused him, then finally accepted. With characteristic frankness, she wrote Putnam about her deepest fears on the eve of their wedding.
Dear GPP, there are some things which should be writ before we are married. Things we have talked over before. Most of them. You must know again my reluctance to marry. My feeling that I shatter thereby chances in work, which means most to me. I feel the move just now as foolish as anything I could do. I know there may be compensations, but have no fear to look ahead. On our life together, I want you to understand I shall not hold you to any medieval code of faithfulness to me, nor shall I consider myself bound to you similarly. I must exact a cruel promise, and that is you will let me go in a year if we find no happiness together. I will try to do my best in every way and give you that part of me you know and seem to want. A.E.
It's not surprising that in all of her writing, Earhart's correspondence with family is the most telling of her personal life, revealing conflicts and opinions as she grew from adolescence into adulthood and into fame. Earhart wrote her mother frequently, reporting on family concerns, sending money, and giving her personal views about her sister's marriage and family. When she first left home to attend a private school in 1916 and 17, Earhart wrote about her place in this new environment. Reflecting on her physical image as a 19-year-old, she writes,
Drill is awful. I look like a broomstick wrapped round and round. Thus nearly everybody looks awful, but I worst. I can wear an old suit with a little alteration, so it will be more reasonable. I hate to spend money for things I never will need nor want.
Money was always a concern in the Earhart household, particularly after her parents' separation and divorce. A letter to her mother in 1917 states,
Dearie, I don't need any spring clothes, so don't worry about sending me money. I have a few dollars still in the bank, and I know you all need things more than I.
Once she became famous, however, the tables turned, and Earhart found herself supporting both her mother and her sister from time to time.
I think that she took almost a maternal role with her mother and her sister, and I think this goes back to the days when they really struggled for money, because you can see in the letters between Amelia after she's famous and her mother and sister, she's always giving them advice. She's always telling them they need to better manage their money, or she's sending them money but telling them to be careful with it. You know, and she gives her sister advice on things like birth control and things like that. And so she does have a very maternal role, I think, in the relationship with both of them. And I think she probably had a reason for feeling that way. I mean, from everything that I've been able to research, her mother was not good with money, and her sister did tend to be a bit flighty about things. And I think she felt like she had to be the responsible one in that situation.
Before crossing the Atlantic in 1928, she wrote a very different kind of letter, what Earhart called popping off letters. They were sealed and held for her mother and father in the event of her death. The letter to her father was not overly sentimental, but short and to the point, written in a breezy tone.
Dearest Dad, hooray for the last grand adventure! I wish I had won, but it was worthwhile anyway. You know that. I have no faith that we'll meet anywhere again, but I wish we might. Anyway, goodbye and good luck to you. Affectionately, your daughter, Meal.
A separate letter to her mother was more serious and reflective. Again, she mentions money, as well as satisfaction with the choices she's made.
I am sorry I had to pass out of the picture in such a way. I am considerable and didn't like leaving you with a burden, or rather without much income. I have put down carefully all my affairs. Please, destroy all my writings without examination, and do what you will with my personal effects. Even though I have lost, the adventure was worthwhile. Our family tends to be too secure. My life has really been very happy, and I didn't mind contemplating its end in the midst of that.
Once she became famous, Earhart realized that the appearance and behavior of her family would reflect upon her as well. In a letter from 1936, Earhart coaches her mother about an upcoming trip abroad. Earhart assumes a commandeering tone, first telling her mother precisely what to pack, which suitcases to take, and how to care for her clothing to look her best. Next, she adds advice about politics and diplomacy.
Please don't down the Roosevelt administration. It's all right to be reactionary inside, but it is out of step with the times to sound off about the chosen people who have inherited or grabbed the earth. You must think of me when you converse. In all cases, be careful of reporters. They may find you out. Be cheerful with them and smile for photographs. The serious face in real life looks sour in print. The grinning face, moderately pleasant.
Earhart's condescending tone about appearances also comes through in her letters when she writes about her sister's family, sometimes referring to her own niece and nephew as brats. In 1933, she responded to photos of the children and her sister, nicknamed Pidge, writing,
Do please have Pidge let the children wear socks so they don't look like bumpkins. And why the silly hair ribbon? I'll buy 'em 6 pair of socks each if she will use them.
In 1935, she takes a similar tone in a letter to her mother.
I am enclosing a check for your personal gifties. I left some with Pidge for the brats, but you may have some specials you'd like to get.
Earhart apologizes to her mother for not writing more frequently. The stress in her life is clear in several letters, including this one from 1935.
I am so sorry I haven't had any time to write you before. I returned from New York and found myself signed for the most strenuous lecture engagement ever undertaken. A few days out, and I came here to speak at National Geographic. Mrs. Roosevelt asked me to stay at the White House overnight, then to make it headquarters until Tuesday when I leave for New England. It has been quieter here than some other places, though my schedule doesn't give one much chance to rest anywhere. There are so many things to do.
Although she never complained publicly, Earhart also suffered from sinus issues throughout her life, a problem exacerbated by changes in altitude. In 1935, she writes her mother after nasal surgery.
I left the hospital as soon as I could, as usual, and went to Mrs. Lighton's. There's a backache which I had thought was a strained muscle turned into pleurisy. I am still in bed with my side strapped. GP arrived yesterday, which helps. I am getting on now and can get up as soon as 3 days pass in which I run no temperature. The nose is healing okay, though I am warned I'll have a headache for another week.
Despite her own medical issues, Earhart took offense when anyone characterized women as the weaker sex. She took time out of her busy schedule in 1935 to write a 3-page reply to Raymond S. Holtz, MD, at the State of Connecticut Department of Aeronautics, challenging his thesis that women should not fly because of their menstrual cycles. The eloquent and pointed letter begins.
Let me tell you how glad I am that you intend a scientific approach. All too often, pronouncements have been made concerning women during menstruation when no laboratory data exist on which to base the dicta. I had begun to feel old wives' tales were rapidly taking the place of balanced judgment as far as women flyers were concerned.
Several pages later, after refuting his claims, she concludes,
I have just one more suggestion to make before I close this very long letter. That is, that concurrently with any tests you run on women, you also examine men for day-to-day fluctuations. After all, what is sauce for the goose is also sauce for the gander. And if both men and women fly, it is only serving science to investigate both for comparison.
The mystery of Earhart's disappearance is certainly a large part of her legacy, but the duality of her personal side and her public persona has also made her a fascinating woman of the era. Study of both the images and writing of Earhart reveal a woman who was overexposed in the press, yet intensely private in her married life, glamorous and beautiful in publicity photos, but also the disheveled girl next door. Both overtly feminine and overtly masculine in her choice of apparel, self-promoting in her actions, yet often self-effacing in her rhetoric, described as friendly and accessible, but also as cold and individualistic, an idealist in her lofty goals, yet a pragmatist in daily life. Earhart's explanation of the duality of clouds in The Fun of It could be a metaphor for the contradictions in her own life. She dismisses the mythical silver lining of a cloud and reveals its murky reality, demonstrating how dramatically a new vantage point can alter one's perception.
The saying about silver linings is pure fiction. The internals of most clouds are anything but silvery. They are as dismally forbidding as anyone can imagine. However, some air travelers know that above them there is a different world from any encountered elsewhere. The sun shines brightly over a fluffy sea with a brilliance more blinding than that of snowfields.